presentation or whatever, just reach out to Peyton or I, and we'll help you out. So I'm going to start with the topics for today's presentation. So first, what is planning? Why do we plan? The types of transit planning, planning requirements that are set up for us by the Federal Transit Administration and US DOT, and just a couple of resources. And I put those resources as QR codes. Instead of providing you a laundry list of resources, I just have two kind of the best resources that will get you pointed in the right direction. So first, what is planning? So there are a few things that really define what planning is, and I thought that this Federal Transit Administration quote from their planning website was really helpful. So transportation planning plays a fundamental role in a state, region, or community's vision for its future. It includes a comprehensive consideration of possible strategies, an evaluation process that encompasses diverse viewpoints, the collaborative participation of relevant transportation-related agencies and organizations, and open, timely, and meaningful public involvement. So there were a few key things that you'll hear throughout this presentation. We want to think about things in a comprehensive standpoint. We want to evaluate alternatives and look at diverse viewpoints. We want collaboration with stakeholders and other agencies. And we want to be open, timely, and meaningful with our public partners. And so why do we plan? We plan because it helps us to determine the goals of an organization, a corridor, an area, a system. It considers the best use of limited resources and looking at those resources and evaluating based on your goals and strategies as an organization, how best to use limited resources. It gives a clear roadmap for implementation. When you don't have a plan as an agency, when you don't have a vision as a corridor or a system, it's hard to know what to do. And so the plan really allows you to understand what to do next and how to do it, with whom, and with what result. And very, very important is it allows the public and stakeholders to have a seat at the table. We serve the public, and so it's really important for us to engage and to have a great process for engaging, and that's important to planning. I teach in the urban planning program, so I teach a lot about planning. And one thing that starts all planning discussions is our 4-step planning process. And they are as such. First, we define the problem. And I'm going to go through each of these steps separately. Then, using our definition of the problem, we conduct technical analysis to understand in more of a technical standpoint the problem and what we're trying to resolve. We evaluate alternatives for that resolution, and then we identify an optimal decision. And in the transportation planning process, we are thinking about a lot of elements, and a lot of times these elements may be our evaluation factors. So things like access to employment, safety, reliability of the system, air quality, connecting with other modes, preservation, and then connecting and integrating with land use are often things that we do in the transportation planning process. But let's start at the beginning, defining the problem. So at the beginning of every planning process, we want to know what the issue is. And we generally do that through information about existing conditions. And that might include stakeholder information, information about the population through socioeconomic characteristics, asking the stakeholders, asking the public, understanding what is happening at your organization, how much things cost, how much things, what is the effectiveness of those. So it's those things that really come out in your existing conditions analysis. And a lot of times you'll see these in maps or tables. You're really presenting a lot of information. So to get to those maps and tables, you use that data to collect and to conduct technical analysis. And there are a lot of places where you can get this information. It's already a little bit analyzed. For example, we at Kansas RTAP provide a county by county demographic analysis for transit providers every fall for you to use with your agency grant applications. So you have that data that tells you about your transit dependent or your potential transit dependent population. So that's using socioeconomic data and then tabulating it so that you can have an analysis of whether your demands are related to a low income population, or your demands are more related to maybe a multilingual population or an aging population, a disabled population. It gives you a sense of what is happening in your community. Then you create and evaluate alternatives. So this is when you look at all the possible alternatives for how you can resolve that problem and then evaluate them. And we often evaluate them, and I'm going to go back to this slide. We evaluate them using metrics that may be associated with some of these items. So how does this help with your system? How does this connect people to jobs? How does this improve safety and security? So you can use some of these elements or other locally derived elements to help evaluate your strategies and determine which is the most likely to meet your demands. And then finally, it's about identifying the optimal decision. And most times it's not one decision. It's not one point where you were doing this and now you're doing that. It is a series of implementable actions that will get you closer to your goal. So when we identify that optimal decision, we, in a plan, will describe what that is, and then we'll have an implementation process that states, in order to get this element of that done, we need this information, we need to include this person, we need this much money, we need these approvals, and when are we going to do it? So it gives that process a little bit more legs to get started. So that's the planning process. So now I'm going to move on to types of planning that you're going to come into contact with as a rural or specialized transit agency. And it really is kind of a bullseye. At the center of the bullseye is your agency and organizational planning. So what are you doing as an agency to plan for how you want that agency to run, your mission, vision, and values? Then you move on past the agency and you could go into corridor or area planning, where you're looking at a specific area and analyzing that. A little bit grander than that is system planning, where you're looking at your entire system and then determining solutions that include all of your routes, all of your areas, all of your corridors. And then finally is regional planning. And regional planning will include your service, but then maybe other services to fit in with a regional system. And I'm going to talk about each of these individually. So starting back at the beginning in region and strategic planning. So strategic planning is something that is done at an organizational level that helps to guide future activities. And it can include things like identifying your mission, vision, and values. So if you work for a non-for-profit organization or for a municipality, there are often strategic planning processes that occur at the organizational level that you might have been a part of. And they always start by saying, what do we want our organization to be? How do we want to get there? And what do we want to make sure that we accommodate as we do that, those mission, vision, and values? In order to understand how to move from where you are now to your mission, vision, and values, you have to analyze your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. There are other ways that are more positive than, weaknesses and threats. I've seen it written a couple other ways, but it really is intended for you to know what are your strengths as an organization, looking internally at an organization level. What are your weaknesses as an organization? And again, this is more of an internal analysis. What opportunities do you have as an organization? And this is looking externally, like positive externally. And what threats? That's looking positive or negative externally. So what threats are there on your agency? So it really gets at both your internal workings and how your organization works with the public. Using that information, you can develop and identify the feasibility of potential strategies to get you towards your goal. And then creating that implementation plan is key to making sure that it isn't just a document on a shelf that's telling you what your vision is, but that you have a process in place that is laid out so people know how they're going to get to that and what is going to what it is going to require for them. And then always developing an evaluation process. How do we know if we have succeeded in reaching our mission? Is our mission the right mission? How do we evaluate that along the way so we know we're reaching towards the right things? And that indicators such as ridership, people served, costs are going in the direction that shows positive growth. So that's strategic planning. If you would like in the chat, please share with us any situations in which you've participated in strategic planning. And I'll give you a few seconds to type in the chat if you like about your experience doing strategic planning at an organizational level. All right, I'll give folks a couple more seconds and then we'll move on to the next section. So I'm going to start talking about corridor area planning. And this happens in all types of geographies, but the intent of corridor or area planning is that you're looking at a section of your service. And for this purpose, we're looking at it from a geographical standpoint. So if you have a portion of your service area, whether it's you're serving really well in the county or in the city, but the county's not being served, potentially you could do a study where you're really looking at service in the county. And when you're doing a corridor or an area plan, you really want to focus on the interrelatedness of issues that help to derive transportation need. So that would be other transportation, land use, housing, economic development, jobs. I know a lot of us have third shift employers that are outside of our transit area boundaries, and also that we can't serve because we currently only operate until 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. How might we serve those differently? So it's important to understand, like, we have a meat packing plant outside of town. They have 3 shifts, and they have a lot of times where their shifts might fluctuate. And so it's really hard to get transit to work around that. It's important to know that information. Then we want to evaluate those potential transportation solutions. So in that example, what if we were to do a van pool program? What if we were to have a shuttle that's really focused around their shift times, but also allows for other employers in the area to do work? So we start to derive those solutions, and then we bring them to the stakeholders and say, how would this work? How would this work for you? Does this fit with your demands? What are some concerns you have? How do you feel like it would be utilized? So asking questions to the public and stakeholder, allowing them to respond to things, because most of the folks that you're communicating with aren't transportation planners. They're not logistics experts. So having them answer questions based on things that are already derived for them, making sure that they know that this isn't the final plan. We just wanted to give you things to respond to, and understand that people may respond negatively. Once you have that engagement, once you do evaluation through other quantitative factors, like how many rides you think you'll serve, how much do you think this will cost, what staffing would it require, what other elements might you need, you can determine that preferred solution and then use that to create that implementation plan. And for a corridor area plan, that implementation plan really allows you to best leverage other people's money. So if you have a grant opportunity that is going to fund capital improvements in specific areas of your community, you can then look at your implementation plan and say, well, we were thinking of doing bus stops and shelters. We have that as an implementation item. We need money for that. And then we can use that to apply for a grant. And it also lets you know what's the most important things. What are the order in which you need to do things in order for it to be successful? What they call critical path in office speak. What are those critical path items that will allow you to move on and move towards what will make you successful? And then creating that solution, working towards that solution. So we had a few people answer the first question. So A member who's on their phone went through a SWOT in order to get a grant. That's a good thing. And then Candace says, we performed a department strategic plan workshop, included human services and transportation. And that's really great because it allows you to understand organizationally what is important. And a lot of times what we find in organizations that don't have a strong strategic plan or don't have a strong mission is that the leadership may have a strong mission in their heads, but it's not being transferred down to other staff. So if you talk to the executive director of an organization, they'll say, well, our mission is to provide service in a cost-effective way to as many people as possible in this county. And then if you were to ask the transit operator, what is the mission of your organization? It would be interesting to know what the difference between that. It's kind of a telephone game. If you ask different people in your organization, what's our mission? And if there's disparate answers, then it's important that we all come together and say, what really is our mission, so that we aren't creeping into so many other missions. So back to corridor area planning. Have any of your organizations conducted plans for specific geographies within your service area? Go ahead, type them in the chat. I'll wait a few minutes. While I'm waiting for that, just a little reminder. There are myriad service options that you can employ and look at for transportation plans. And that could be any type of fixed route service, any type of flexible service, or any type of demand responsive service, potentially looking at integration with other modes like bike share, or looking at how pedestrians access the system. So having a broad set of options is really helpful. So now I'm going to move into system planning. So system planning is looking at the entirety of your transit system, and it looks at the system in order to determine what type of transit service you should provide, where you should provide it, how much, and when. So it's really answering all those questions. And in order to do that, there are important elements that you need to work through. First, understanding your mission statement and your system priorities. So taking that strategic mission and seeing how that works within your transit system. Then conducting an inventory of the things that you have as an organization, your organizational assets. So that may include how much budget you have each year, how many vehicles you have, the staff, what facilities are you utilizing, the equipment, the services that you provide, getting a full breadth of the understanding of what you do. Communicating with the community is really important in a system-wide plan, because it allows them to tell you what their needs are in a system-focused way that is not direct with one geography. So a person may need to get to the grocery store and have limited mobility. Another person may need to get to that grocery store to go to work. How do we get all of those community needs so we know how to address to create a system that addresses them? And then we create a prioritization of improvements, and that is that implementation plan. So evaluating what we have, analyzing what the community wants, we can then prioritize improvements. We can say this needs to happen first, then this, because none of us have enough money to just wholesale change our system. So a lot of times you may have heard of this as a transit development plan. And transit development plans are often required if you're going to move to a different mode or a different service type. So for example, if you've been providing demand responsive service in your region and you want to transition to fixed route or transition to a variety of different service types, it's important to have a transit development plan that really focuses at the system level on the improvements you'd like to make. And it's very similar to that system plan, but that transit development plan is really focused on the start of new or altered service. So you can see up here what that all includes. So that contextual information, the vision and goals of your organization and of your service, what conditions are out there, engagement with stakeholders and the public, understanding and evaluating demand. And that can be different in every community. I have communities that I've worked with that have a very strict peak hour demand, where the majority of their transit riders are going to work during a first shift and coming home after that first shift. And then I have communities where that demand is very flat, or where it has a peak at different times. It's important to know where you are in that. And then that is very specifically connected back to who your population is, who your employers are, and what other special things are going on in your community. Like if you have a major employer, if you have a university, if you have another thing that brings together folks that have mobility needs, it's important to understand that in your demand assessment. And an example of that is that there is a community in Eastern Kansas that has a school for the blind. It's important to evaluate how that location might bring in folks that have mobility challenges. So if you have something like that in your community, it's important to have a sense for how you might serve that very specific population. Then you evaluate, obviously, your solutions. How might they improve service, cost, and community exposure? Creating a financial plan tells you how quickly you can get this done and if you're able to sustain it, and then creating that implementation plan. So has anyone in here done a transit development plan for their community? I'm going to stop for a second, take a drink of coffee. Anna says no. All right, and then something that a lot of you have participated in is regional planning. And I'm going to talk in our planning requirements section about one specific regional planning exercise you may have participated in. But regional planning looks at your transit organization and every other transit and transportation organization within a study area to determine how coordination can occur, to develop strategies for improving the level of service across all individuals in your community, and identifying where there's points of leverage amongst a transit provider to provide a certain type of service. So this is looking at your 5310 organizations, your 5311 organizations. If you're serving an urbanized area, you might be looking at those urban area fixed route programs and really identifying solutions to transportation needs on a holistic level. So just to kind of go back, it is all part of, there's not one plan that you should do. You should consider doing all of this planning, starting off with a strong strategic plan that sets the tone for your agency and what you want to accomplish. Then looking at corridors or areas with specific concerns, looking across your system for how you might want to improve system-wide service. Then looking at your region and see how your transit system fits in with the transportation system within your region. So I'm going to move on to our planning requirements that we have as federally funded organizations. And the first one is how most of you have possibly participated in transportation planning in the past. So the mouthful of words is Coordinated Public Transit Human Service Transportation Plan. This is something that has been required for about 14, 15 years. It is required of any recipient who receives 5310 funding, so funding for the elderly and disabled. They must participate in a coordinated planning process in an identified region, and the states and locals are able to determine what that regional area is, and that what they're applying for federal assistance for must be derived from that plan. So in the state of Kansas, each of our coordinated transit districts has a coordinated public transit human services transportation plan. And in addition, there might be some sub-area coordinated transportation plans, like what we have in Lawrence or in the Kansas City metropolitan area, all part of CTD1, and there is a CTD1 coordinated plan, but they also have their metropolitan area coordinated plan. So in a coordinated plan, you are required to work with all of the organizations within your region that provide 5310 service, and also with those benefactors of that service. So that might be individuals who receive the service, but it might also be consistent destinations. So your hospital, your doctor's office, your social service organizations, your library, your CDDOs, talking to them as well to understand how we can best coordinate service so that they have better outcomes. A lot of our folks who are transportation disadvantaged are more likely to miss appointments or to miss activities, not be a part of public services, have worse health outcomes. So by coming together, you're able to provide solutions to improve that. Currently, your coordinated public transit human service plan, like I said, is on the CTD level, and they're all available on the KDOT website. They were completed, I believe, in 2018. So it's about time to update those plans. So it's good to think about. At some point, you're going to be engaged in this process again. What are solutions that you want in this important planning process? So in addition, another planning requirement that you have as rural transit agencies is part of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And we talk about this quite a bit. We're doing a little bit of work on this for Kansas RTAP to provide better tutorials on how to conduct a Title VI plan and how to implement Title VI requirements. There are 4 key components of Title VI that are important to consider, and a lot of them are focused around planning elements. So first, it prohibits all discriminatory activity that is done with things that are funded federally. But it also requires a specific Title VI complaint process that takes serious any complaints of discrimination, documents them, and has that documentation in a consistent way so it can be reviewed by federal reviewers or anyone else who is concerned about discriminatory complaints at your organization. The 2 things that are really planning oriented is 1, you're required to have a public involvement plan that describes how you engage with the public on all activities that require public engagement. So as you may know, you're required to implement public involvement prior to submitting your grant application. You're required to have a public hearing. You're required to print in your local newspaper, have an ad showing that there will be a public hearing on grant funding related to transit. Those things would be implemented in your public involvement plan. How do you engage the public on decision making? You're also required to have a limited English proficiency plan. And this plan really looks at the population of your community and determines if there are specific populations that are large enough in number where it's essential for you to create language support. So in a lot of parts of Kansas, we have limited English proficiency requirements around Spanish language materials. So you would evaluate the amount of Spanish language speakers in your community to determine if it is a large enough population where you need to provide services written, to provide translated services, and provide additional community outreach to specific populations. So that's an important thing. Stay tuned. We're going to have more information as Kansas RTAP on Title VI and on ways to streamline your planning process, but also make it more effective. So that public involvement plan, just a little bit more on that. Public involvement has 2 real elements to it. One is your stakeholders, and sometimes that is kind of a separate thing than public involvement, but they are a member of your public. And those are people that you may work with on a business point of view, or who might be a lead of a community organization, or might be providing you funding, or might be a required element like a governmental organization that you have to participate in to get your funding. The public is everybody else in your service area and beyond. So that can be folks who have never ridden a transit vehicle and people who ride it every day. And specifically those people who may not get that information through written English language. So you have to find ways to identify who needs public engagement and the best way to engage with them. And we can talk about that in the Q&A because we are close to wrapping up. So to wrap up, just a few resources, and I made them QR codes so that you can click on them easily through this presentation. And we'll leave this up unless we're referencing a specific slide. But here are 2 resources that are really helpful to you if you want information on planning. So the first one is the Federal Transit Administration Planning Resource Library, and it's available on the QR code on the left. And the resource library is really helpful in that it gives you a sense of all types of resources for all types of planning your organization might do. And some of that planning may be large systems, rail systems, and it might not be as transferable to you, but there are other types of plans in that library that might be transferable. Second, and I encourage everyone on here to go to the National RTAP Transit Managers Toolkit. It is a really important document that can help you a lot in managing your organization. And there's a specific planning and evaluation section that really describes all the different types of planning, how you might do that. And there's also other resources. I would encourage you to have National RTAP and have this manual bookmarked because it's really a great resource. So with that, that's our presentation. We really want to get questions from you on what you're looking to do, what planning means to you, how we can help give you ideas for how to best plan. So yeah, I'll turn it over to Peyton to facilitate however you choose to do it, Peyton.
Yeah, so far we don't have any questions in the chat, so people are feel free to put them in the chat and I can read them out, or if you feel comfortable, you can unmute yourself at this time and ask questions as well. I can kind of start off the questions if you'd like. I did have a question.
Oh, sure.
So I noticed like in the Title VI, the public involvement plan is like required of transit providers, but there's also public engagement from other plans like the strategic plan and whatnot. So can I utilize the public involvement plan that I've already made for Title VI for other plans, or do I have to come up with new strategies?
I think for any plan that you all do, I would have Title VI, your public involvement plan that's required for Title VI, be the baseline. Like, do that for every plan. If it includes how you expend resources, how you distribute resources, or what those resources might look like, first start with that Title VI public involvement plan, and then build upon that based on the level of public engagement that you might need. So for example, for a strategic plan, I think it's important for you to reach out to your public and your stakeholders in order to understand how your organization is perceived and what things you could do to improve. That helps you to understand those opportunities and threats. When you're looking at a corridor or area plan, absolutely start from that baseline of the public participation plan that is, or public involvement plan that's in Title VI, but then what more can you do in that area? Reaching out to specific employers, going to specific churches, going to the grocery store and have a tabling event. So it really, I guess I've said this 15 different ways, but it starts, your baseline should always be that public involvement plan that's in your Title VI, and then use that to help augment what you might do to reach the goals of your specific plan.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions?
So folks in the group, what if I asked, and I'm going to, what are the things that you most want to plan for? What would that be? And you can put your answers in the chat. And I can give an example of our organization, Kansas RTAP. We plan for a year at a time, and we look at how we're going to expend our resources throughout the year. So when we're going to publish our newsletters, when we're going to do webinars, and how we make sure that our staff is allocated appropriately at those times. So we don't have people like doing 6 really hard things at once. We want to spread that out, but we also want to make sure we have the resources to do that. So we look at our financials and identify, if we only have this much money, what is our mission, vision, and values, and how we use those to prioritize what is the most important. So that's kind of how we use planning with RTAP. So nobody has anything that they want to plan for. That's okay.
I'm not typing fast enough. My name is Kaylee. I'm from the Mulvane Senior Center. We just got a grant, or in the process of getting it. And so we're right now, we kind of did the strategic planning. But since we don't have that, you know, we're new to all of it. So
Yeah.
what would be like the best advice you could give to us, since we are just new, just starting out, so we don't know, you know, all the all the situations that could occur. We're still learning and still planning. So what would be your advice?
Well, my first advice is reach out to us, and we're always here happy to help you. But what I would say is reach out to your partners in your coordinated transit district. I know Candace is on the phone here, and Jessica's on the phone from your CTD. What have they done? What's worked for
Oh,
them?
Jessica has been awesome. We
Yeah,
love
Jessica's pretty
Jessica.
awesome.
Actually, you're going to meet this week. So yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so really the most important thing I can tell any new transit professional is to find mentors, to find a mentor that really is helping you understand how to move your business forward organizationally, but then also have your pool of folks that you call when you want just like, I don't know how to reach out to my public. How do you guys reach out to your public? Or, man, we don't have a newspaper in our area anymore. How are you communicating with folks? So having those people that you can bounce stuff off of, I think is really helpful.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm kind of also, with all the other senior centers, the transportation goes through them. So I've got the two local ones that I've been collaborating with too as well, and
And
having
if you
them.
started with a strategic plan, then you're starting strong. Like
Oh,
that tells me that you're thinking through, like you're getting your vision understood from the beginning, and then you can grow from that. And then just always hearkening back to that vision, that mission. What are we doing and why are we doing it? How are we doing it? And making sure the decisions you make are consistent with that overarching vision.
okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem. And Peyton, we have a few in the chat.
Yeah, Candace says plan how we covered trips when having a driver shortage and other ways to provide services, contracting, etc.
And that's a really important one, Candace, as we are getting into huge inflation issues and consistent budgets with KDOT. It's important for you to evaluate your work, evaluate your service, and find out how you can I don't even want to say do more with less. It's keep the wheels on the ground. And a lot of that, back in the day when everyone was getting the money that they needed, you didn't have to go and talk to your partners. You didn't have to go talk to the transit agency down the street because you could just provide the service. That's not the environment we are in anymore. I would say do your bread and butter as best as possible, and things that are kind of outside of what you do well, find partners and complete it through some sort of partnering arrangement, whether it is working with contracted services, whether it's working with another organization. If you guys aren't having a lot of luck with maintenance internally, partnering to get that. That's the only way things are going to get done. And I know that there are concerns because we all really care about the people we serve. And the way we deal with folks we care about is we want to protect them ourselves. But we are not in a situation where we can do that effectively anymore. We need to partner, and we need to trust our partners will take care of our people like they would take care of their own.
And then Jill says, I am working towards the ability to construct a building to house our transit vehicles, allowing us better accessibility and organization with decreased funds. It's definitely a challenge.
That's important, Jill, and that's something we're working on at Kansas RTAP, is a guidebook to help with rural transit facility development, because a lot of planning has to go into that. And there are a lot of planning processes within the facility development process, such as when can you acquire land? How do you select property? How do you program out your facility? That can be very confusing and frustrating if it's new. And then you go to the federal documents and they're like, I'm not developing a rail station. I am developing a bus maintenance facility. You know, like, how do I make that work? And so planning ahead, really thinking through how you're going to fund the actual construction of it and the overage costs that will come with it, but then how you're going to construct or how you're going to budget for those maintenance and operations. Because once that building's up, you now own a building, kind of like when you own a home, and you need to be prepared to have operating assistance for it every year. So planning for that facility before just applying for it is huge. Others?
Does anyone have any last questions or comments? We don't have any more comments about how people have experienced planning so far. So
Yeah, and if you just want to raise your hand and talk, that's totally fine too.
okay. Well, Lisa, do you have any last words to share?
Please reach out to us anytime. Anytime you need assistance or need some ideas. This is our job. We get funded through KDOT to provide training and technical assistance to you. If you aren't on our email distribution list, and you probably are since you got this webinar, but make sure you go to the Kansas RTAP website and sign up so that you can get our resource roundups, our newsletters, information about our webinars and other programs that we have coming up. But we're here for you. Let us know what you need and we'll do our best to support you.
And I just put that link in the chat, and then it should be really accessible to figure out how to get to our newsletters. You can sign up on that same page that I just added into the chat.
You rock, Peyton.
Thank you. Okay, if no one has any more last comments or questions, I think we're done here. Thank you all for coming to the webinar today, and thank you so much to Lisa for presenting on this topic.
Have a great Tuesday, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.